Wait. Go.
Yeah, okay. Today we're telling a story for Emma. Some of her background, her history background. My name is Amelia Feller, maiden name Tritchler, and my grandmother's name was Hauptmann. And there's where we're going to start our story. This is a family tree that was in a baby book of one of my children, and I talked to Rose Hauptmann, Rose Deachin Hauptmann, and asked her about the old country, as she called it, but she never wanted to talk about it. In German, she'd swear at me. But I told her that on this tree, there was a place that I had to fill out, and so she finally said, in German, we came from the Panga Valley, and that's all she'd say. So, in later years, I talked to my mother a lot, and she told me a lot of stories that she could remember. My mother could remember when she was in Austria-Hungary, where she was born. And through the stories that she told me, a historian in Salt Lake City was able to find the town of St. Johann Pangau, which means the town of St. John in the Pangau Valley. Eventually, I was able to go to the old country in 1990, and by the grace of God, the leader of our group, who was Polish, and I can't remember his name, asked me why I traveled across the country and the ocean all by myself. And he started to say, at this older age. But he was nice and he said, at this age. And I said, my secret dream was to find the valley where my mother was born. But actually, I said, I came over to see the Passion Play. And like I say, God was good. This leader, a Polish man who was our leader, put me on a train the next morning, gave me all the protection that he could, and I spent the next 2 days in the Pangau Valley trying to find out something about my people. In the town of St. Johann, I felt their spirits. I stepped on the earth after getting off the train. I got goosebumps. I hyperventilated and I cried. And I had a camcorder. You ought to see the film I made. It's just terrible. There were 3 boys on the end of the train platform, and they said in German, "What's the matter with that crazy American woman?"
I just wish someone would have went with you. I wish we'd have known.
They
We should
all
have planned it.
well,
Yeah.
Anyway, that's right. It would have been nice.
Yeah.
Somebody to carry the camcorder,
Yeah.
not me. And anyway, I told him in German to shut up. Halt dein Maul und papo nicht so viel. That means shut up and don't talk so much. Anyway, I went into the little cafe that's at every little train stop in the foothills of the Swiss Alps. And the lady who was in charge in there, in this little cafe, I told her that I tried to speak German, and she laughed and she said she doesn't want to speak German. She wants to speak English. Well, I said I'm better at English. Not too much, but some. Anyway, she was able to find a young man and a car, and he drove me around for the next 2 days to the different Catholic churches in the area. And I was not able to find out anything new about the family because all the records from the churches that were in existence at the turn of the century and prior to that, because my folks came here at the turn of the century. Grandmother and father, an auntie, a great auntie, my mother, her sister Anna, and a brother Albert. They all came at the turn of the century. Anything before 1934 is all on tape in Salzburg, Austria, and you cannot get in there. There's no way that I could get in there. Coming home, I talked to a friend who's a professor of languages at Reed College, whose sister-in-law came from that same area. She joined the Mormon church, and they need to know all these things. Even she couldn't break the barrier. So I know nothing more about them other than what I've told you.
But you found a church or a village that...
During the trip from, St. Anton is where we all stayed. I traveled from St. Anton through the mountains, not over, through the mountains to the Pongal Valley, which was over the next ridge from St. Anton. And I discovered that there were 2 churches left sitting on top of little hills and surrounded by white crosses, little tiny white crosses. The churches themselves, with my untrained eye, I wouldn't say were larger than 20 feet by 20 feet. And I thought that was strange, but then thinking that everywhere these parishioners went, they had to walk. So these little churches would be like 2 or 3 miles apart on top of little hills where that could not be cultivated because this was an agricultural area at that time.
And this is still in Germany then, or in
This
Hungary?
is in Austria.
Hungary.
This is in Austria now. At that time it was Austria-Hungary. You want to shut that off a minute?
Go.
Okay. We're still in the Pongal Valley, and I want to tell you a few stories about the family about the children that were raised and lost in the Pongal Valley. My grandmother and grandfather, Albert and Rosa Hauptmann, had a total of 13 children, and only 5 lived to maturity, and the last one being born in the United States. Otherwise, they only brought 4 to this country. Mother told me in her later years she finally understood why the ones who survived, why they lived. In those days there were no bottles, no refrigeration, no baby food, nothing but the mother's sustenance. And the ones who were born and needed attention and food through the summer were neglected because the whole family had to walk to work every day. I don't know how many miles, but
They farmed, or?
Well, they lived under a monarchy, so you know that they were not treated all that well. They lived in a self-maintained little village. The small ones stayed home around the communal cook stove. And their mother said there was always 2 or 3 fat ladies around there. Well, they were probably pregnant. Anyway, these little kids, when the ones who, the little babies that were left and their mothers were at the field, they were supposed to be fed at noon. And every woman would have to bring a pot of soup, let's say, and the lady who were around the stove would bake the bread, but you had to bring it all there ready to be cooked. So she'd give, like Mother said, when she got to be about 4, she was appointed one summer to feed the baby. And the cook made the mistake of saying, "Now, Mary, don't feed this to the baby if it's too hot." So Mother said she would taste it as she walked along to the house, and there's always 2 or 3 other little guys following along. And of course they'd want to taste because they were hungry, and she said that too many times by the time they got to the house with their little cup of soup, there was nothing left for the baby. So when grandmother would come home that night, be warm and hot, tired, and her breasts filled with milk, just dripping. They never wore underclothes, just a heavy, dark shirt made a lot like this one that I have on, and a long black skirt and shoes of some sort. Mother said, when we would see Gram coming, or Mother coming, one of us would run in and get a big container of, like a bucket of water, and Grandma would be unbuttoning her blouse, all these little buttons clear to the bottom, and by the time she'd get to the house, why, she'd sit down and just sponge her whole chest off, and someone else would have brought the baby, and the baby would be so hungry that it would eat so fast that when it finally quit eating so it could breathe, Grandma would always put it on her shoulder and pat its back, and the milk would just fly out over her back. And Mother said she and all the other little kids would laugh and laugh, because it always happened, never failed. By that time, Grandma, now this is my mother talking, Grandma, so I should say her mother, or Grandma Hauptmann, would be sponging off her other breast and cooling down. The part of the milk, of course, would stay down, and then the baby would eat on the other side, but not so fast, and would keep most of that milk down. And when the baby was sated or satisfied, then Grandma could get up and do her chores around the place, and I'm sure there were many. And then when they finally were free to go to bed, the baby nursed all night long. The baby slept with its mother and father, and it nursed all night long.
Now, didn't you say she lost a lot of children?
Well, yes, she did. This happened 8 times when she was in the old country, because as each day passed, the baby would get weaker and weaker, and after about 2 months, Mom said, as near as she could remember, the baby would get so it would be so weak it couldn't eat when Grandma would come home. Excuse me. And so when it got to that point, they would make what Mom called a sugar tit, and they would grind up poppy seeds and sugar, and the baby would suck on that whenever it was hungry, and it just slowed his whole system down and eventually died. And there was nothing you could do about it. And Mother thought, she said, I never have understood why some of us lived until she said, she was looking at the birthdays and she decided it was because she was born in February. So she had all of February and March and April to get strong enough, you know, to get a toehold in life. And then her sister Anna was born in the spring also, and she lived. Here they are when they're in America. This is my mother right there. And this is Aunt Anna, her sister Anna, and her brother Albert also lived. This is the fourth child who was born in the United States of America. You want to shut that thing off again?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Okay.
Okay. And one more daughter who is in this picture, and her name was Barbara. Her real name was Barbara, but everyone called her Bessie. The reason she had this nickname is because she was named after Barbara Deacon, a sister to Rose Hauptman. She was a maiden sister, a maiden girl that came with her. The only family that Grandma had here. Grandpa had a sister in Jervis, and that's why they moved to this valley.
Your Grandpa Hauptman did?
Yeah, Grandpa Hauptman had a sister. Her name was Anna Ruger. And this is the little girl, Genevieve, that was born in the United States. Bessie here is wearing her older sister Anna's wedding dress. At this time, she had what is known as consumption. I think we call it tuberculosis. Anyway, she died at age 16 and was buried in this dress. And and the whole family are all resting at the St. Louis Cemetery, not too far from the St. Louis Catholic Church in the county of Marion, Oregon.
Now, what's that picture there, Amelia? What's
Now this is, okay, they're sitting on the front steps of the house. And here is the house in St. Louis. St. Louis was a platted city, never incorporated, but it had a general store and a blacksmith shop. Anyway, these are the steps where this picture over there was taken. And if you look closely, if you can, there's a little kitten there,
In the corner?
right there. See its
Okay.
little white feet?
Mm-hmm.
And all of these buckets hold old-fashioned plants in old lard cans. See here? And here's a hen and chicks. And there's a geraniums. And
So-
I'm not very good at flowers. This looks like a wandering Jew, but I'm not sure.
So that man and woman there, your Hauptmans built
This,
that house?
yeah, Grandpa was a cabinet maker, and in the old country that was, you were really somebody when you had a trade. And Grandma, so he was able to build this house. Grandmother did not want to marry Albert. She loved somebody else.
In that village that they were in?
Yes, in this little Pangau village, and but her parents said, no, Albert's for you because he has a trade and he'll amount to something.
Wow.
They were as different as day and night. Grandma worried all the time. She used to wake Grandpa up at night in bed in this house. Their bedroom was right over there. In fact, it's right here is the window to their bedroom. She used to wake him up at night and say, Albert, I'm so worried about this and that and the other. And he'd say, Rosa, my dear, go to sleep, he said. We'll let Nellie worry about it. And I asked Mother when she was telling me this story, who was Nellie? And she said, Grandpa said, it's the horse. Mom said, it's the horse. And Grandpa said, let the horse worry. It has a bigger head than he has.
So
And that's
why,
his attitude.
was it?
Yeah.
Now why did they leave that valley? You said it
Well,
was the turn of the century?
persecution, hard times, first of all. A religious persecution. No way on God's green earth could they have bettered themselves there. In this little tiny village, they lived under this monarchy who just, kept them under his thumb. They had to, Mother said that in the old country, evidently they each had a cow, no horse. I don't know how, I guess they spaded up their garden, but they had chickens. She mentioned about selling butter and eggs and wrapping the produce in grape leaves. We always had wine. You had to have some joy in your life. And
But she was a young girl when they came on the ship then? Over
she, I forgot to look up how old she was when they were married. But she outlived Grandpa by many, many years. I should have done that before we started this. Anyhow, I can remember about when I'm 80, and I can remember going to the state fair with Grandmother in a buggy with Nellie, who had one of her back legs was swollen from the ankle up past the knee part, And that's why we could never ride her, or that's why we could never go to visit anyone, because Nellie needed her rest, because in the daytime she had to cultivate the berries and do the garden work, and if they needed to go to town, for food supplies or feed or something, that was all that she could do. And I never did know what was wrong with her. But we did get to go to the fair, and I saw a two-headed calf. I was just little. I can't even remember how old I was. I never forget that two-headed calf. Well,
So they had 8 children there, and they lost all of them.
they
but-
lost all of them. And
But
when
four.
I was in Germany, in the Pongau Valley. I looked for the church with the 8 little graves around it and the information, but I was not able to find either one.
But then they all came with just
They
their
immigrated
family.
here at the turn of the century. I don't really know the name of the ship. They settled in West Virginia. Grandma ran a boarding house, and of course the girls had to help. And Grandpa was underground most of those 2 years, which he hated with a passion, because he was a peasant that needed to be in the sunshine. And on the way to the West Coast by train, Grandma discovered that she was pregnant with Genevieve Hauptmann,
Which would have been number.
13, number 13. And she was overwhelmed and tried to jump off the train. It scared Grandpa and everyone else to death. My God, what would we do, without Mother? That's the only story that I know about them
On that train.
coming over here.
Would you say that he worked with the? I like that thing about the donkeys. What
Oh,
was that?
well, when Grandpa worked in West Virginia in the coal mines, the little coal carts were pulled by little gray donkeys. He called them donkeys, Mother said, not mules, donkeys. And these little animals were born and lived and died in the darkness of the tunnels. That just hurt Grandpa terribly. He couldn't believe that, that anything that God created should have to live that way. And the reason to keep them down there, it kept them smaller, because then they didn't have to dig such huge, big tunnels. Men were they'd have to kind of stoop, crawl, and hack away. But it also, it did something to the animals' eyes, and so they had to kind of lead them around.
Gee.
It was just not healthy. It was just not good.
Well, they
He-
came and stayed out here then with his sister. Was that why they?
Well,
came?
then they came to the West Coast too, and they lived with Grandpa's sister, Anna Hauptmann Ruger, and I don't really know how long, but it must have been close to a year, because they all had to work. And from where they settled with Anna and John Ruger in Jervis, they had to walk then at least close to 5 miles to this 5 plot, not acres, platted. The city was platted, and they had 5 of the plats in this area. And Grandpa built that house because Grandmother said she'd rather live in a tent than live with this other family any longer. It was too much. So
They farmed then.
they just
farmed his
worked
whole
out.
life? Yeah.
They did the same work here as they did in the old country.
But
They
had
picked.
the
I can
house.
remember following when I was going, before I went to grade school, I can remember following mother and grandmother, and we walked quite a few miles to the Stoop Brothers Ranch, and we'd pick up potatoes. Now, mother and grandma and grandpa would pick up potatoes and put them in sacks, gunny sacks, from buckets. I would pick up the little bitty ones that were too small to go into the buckets, and then we'd carry those home, and Grandma would cook them for the pigs, and I suppose anything else that would eat it. It was they were very frugal, hard-working people. And I remember going with them on little safaris like that when I was small, and for lunch we had good old-fashioned homemade bread. Grandma could make the best bread. But along with that bread, we didn't get jam and jelly and peanut butter. We got a slab of smoked bacon and a slice of onion. No salt, nothing, just eat it. If you want to eat a raw potato, eat it. It's okay. And water to drink if we were lucky. I remember those little incidents when I was little.
You said Grandma Warren remembered helping build that chimney on that house.
Oh yes. When, now we're back to this house. When Grandpa was first building it, see this chimney up here? There was another one in the back. Also, when they added on, they added a kitchen and a little storeroom and so forth. And I don't remember the year that this happened. But Mother at that time was just going to start to grade school. And so she was helping Grandpa with the chimney. And he had evidently the mortar up on the roof, and Mother would bring up little bricks in her little apron. Nobody wore slacks or jeans or, But she said she'd put up a couple or three in her apron and climb the ladder around the back, because this chimney is on the other side. Climb the ladder up and then hand the bricks to Grandpa. And one day when she was helping, she happened to glance next door over this way, and there was a little house there. And she saw her friend Lena Engelhardt. So she said she laid the last brick on the roof of this thing, trudged down the ladder, ran across the little field there in the weeds and things. And Lena's on one side of the fence and she's on the other, and they say to each other in German, "Where have you been? What happened?" Well, of course, in those days, there were no telephones, nobody could write, couldn't send a cable. There was no way to communicate.
Still ended up beside each other there.
Well, they must have, yeah, that's right. Anyway, I have a picture of Mother, Mary Hauptmann, and Lena Engelhardt when they first started to grade school at St. Louis.
So they knew each other back in Austria,
They were born
Hungary.
in the old country. They met in the United States when they were about, let's say, 5 or 6, and they stayed friends till they died. They both married in the valley. They both had 2 girls. Mother had more children after that, when she married the second time after her first husband died. And at this time, this is August the 8th, 1997, in Woodburn, Oregon. I'm not too far from St. Luke's Catholic Church, from where we're sitting or standing. I am still friends with Lena Englehart's youngest daughter. We see each other in church.
Something does that.
Yeah.
There's a small
We-
world.
It's a small world.
Well, you remember you said, what was I thinking? You don't remember too much about when they got to West Virginia, but did they have to go through Ellis Island and get held up or anything?
As far as I know, there were people, when they came to Ellis Island and went through the health part of the immigration procedure, they were all afraid because a lot of their people were sent back.
Yeah. So she
But they all came through. Mother said coming over on the ship,
How old would she have been then? Maybe?
younger than 5.
Okay, that's right, because she started school
Yeah,
here.
younger. So she'd be like 3 or 4, you know,
Mhm.
just old enough to be carefree. Mother said they weren't really cabins. They lived in the bottom of the ship with a lot of other immigrants, and they had wood stoves to cook on
Hmm.
in a certain area. And she said the women would fight because if the stoves were you could only burn so much wood. Everybody had to be there at the same time. There wasn't enough room. Everybody was homesick and on edge and afraid. And she said she never thought about that for years and years because she and her sister Bessie, who is younger than she by not very much, were dressed in their regular little clothes, and there was no place to play down in the steerage part, so they'd go up on deck, but it was so filled with supplies, you know, that it'd be just about like a storage cupboard. And Mother said you couldn't play, you couldn't even hardly get through, you had to climb over this and that, so they'd go up on the next deck, which was not allowed. But they went up there anyway. And they were just happy, you know, and they sang and they danced and they could just to get away from that hole that they lived in, she said. And so she said they sang and danced. And Mother's like me, she danced till she died. And the people on the passengers up above would see these little tads down there, you know, and they'd toss them money. Gosh, that was great, you know. Look at all that shiny stuff. But they didn't dare show it to anybody because they found it in a place where they shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
So they took it back. Mother said to look at it in the dark, you know, and feel it and giggle and talk and laugh about it. She said they found an old Bull Durham sack. They're just little tiny cotton sacks, maybe 6 inches long, had a little drawstring. You see them on Western cowboy shows now. They roll their own cigarettes. Anyhow, that thing was filled with money when they got to New York. And so when Grandmother was packing up the things, you know, to embark, she ran across this little sack of money. She didn't know what it was. The kids wouldn't tell her because they knew they had done a wrong thing. So Grandma says, you know, in German, she swore and tossed it out the porthole.
Oh.
And when she said, in later years, she never did get over the fact that she threw away all that money. She had no idea how much it was. They laughed about it for a year. It could have been, well, I don't know how much it could have been, but $1 in those days was a lot.
Helped them
And they
anyway.
felt bad because they lost their little things to play with, you know. But Grandma felt bad when she realized she
It was
threw away a
money.
life savings.
Do you have any idea what Grandma and Mary Orrin's birth date was?
Oh, you mean when she was born?
Yeah, I don't even know
Yeah,
if we know
I do
that.
know. But you'll have to shut it off and run in the other room.
Oh, that's okay. No, I just wondered who these people are too while we
Oh.
can go out in the other room where it's cool.
Well, we'll
You
start
told us-
over here. Well,
I don't know who those two little kids are.
this is on the front porch in St. Louis, Oregon. And this is Albert, the only boy that lived that Grandma and Grandpa had, the only boy. And this is Bessie, and she must have been about 15 or 16 there. And then this is Aunt Genevieve,
Who was born
in this country. And you see, she's quite a bit younger than Albert, but look at the size of her. They look like twins. They ate everything that they wanted here. I mean, they had all the milk they wanted, and eat because they're on a farm and with Grandpa's sister.
Who are the older people then on the house side there? I couldn't
Here?
see that one. Yeah.
Well, this is a younger or a different picture. This Grandpa looks younger here.
Taken earlier.
Well, it couldn't be too much difference because of the clothes, you
Mhm.
see?
Yeah.
They,
Oh, it's the same 6 people then. I see.
I think, yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Except the whole house is in the, and you know, these little plats that they had, I can remember that the garden, not flowers, the garden grew up to next to the walkway here, and there were little cabbages, lots of cabbage, and lots of green things like kale and that sort of thing. And Grandma, and the reason I remember this is I remember her walking sideways like this, you know, to go like just stomp, 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 and then that's all the distance the rows were apart. They used every inch of land. But she did, I take that back, she did have flowers. And they were some kind of a pink rose, a big cabbage type rose. And the reason I remember this is because on holy days, especially the days that honored the Virgin Mary, we were allowed to take those heads off and put them in a little basket, and then as they always had parades and things like that
Huh.
to venerate the feast days, and whoever had the flowers could walk ahead and sprinkle them on the ground, and everybody walked behind.
Huh.
So she did have flowers.
Now those people behind you on the wall then are the children and Grandma.
Okay,
now,
we
and
get
after
a-
she
Okay, what I can do, okay, we're ready?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Emma, we're going to just tell a few stories about what happened to your ancestors when they lived in the United States of America. They were always happy that they came. They never regretted. I was happy to know that, truly. Grandfather here was born on the 5th of January in 1860 in Austria-Hungary. Baptized a Catholic, died on the 9th of April in 1919, and he's buried in St. Louis at in the cemetery there. He was married once to Rose Deacon Hauptmann, who, by the way, looks a lot like my daughter Jean,
Is that
who
right?
had the family tree in her baby book that got us all started on this.
Hmm.
Just happened to notice that.
Huh.
Grandmother, okay, have to turn the page. Have patience, my child. Grandmother Rose Deacon was born on the 8th of April in 1861 in Austria-Hungary, baptized Catholic, and died on the 9th of July in 1943. She was buried in St. Louis also. She outlived Grandpa for quite a while. I'm not good at figures, I can't tell
Almost
you how
30
long.
years. How did she live? Did she live with her kids
She
then
lived
from
on
then
the-
on?
Okay, after Grandpa died, she stayed on the little farm, or the little area that they had, the little land that they had in St. Louis. And her son Albert lived with her until he died.
He died before her.
Yes, Albert had seizures. No one knows why that happened in the family. No one knows why. Grandma felt that he could have been injured not when he was born, because they weren't apparent until he came to this country. When he fell, going up some stairs, and slipped between the steps and was hanging there with his chin and the back of his head. That's the only thing that Grandmother Hauptmann could relate this to.
That was there on their place?
No, when they were in Virginia in the coal mines, you know, when they were working in Virginia. I remember Grandmother working so hard, and Uncle Albert also, and every quack person that came along with these peddlers, you know, that came along and have this medicine and that medicine, this salve and that, Grandma would buy it in the hopes that it would heal her child, her only son. I remember that real well. The neighbors were all good to watch Uncle Albert. They would always hire him because he was a good worker. He just had this affliction. He died.
Yeah, did he die from illness? Probably,
Oh gosh, okay. He died at a young age, like in his 40s, late 30s or 40s. And he died of drowning. He was walking from the Engelhart house, he was between the Engelhart house and his own home, coming home from church, and he had a seizure and fell down and fell in the creek, in the ditch. And that's how his life ended. After that, Grandmothers took a lot of care. Can we change pictures again? Or can you move over?
I'm there.
Oh, yeah. After he died, Grandmother had Cousin Joe live with her till he was about 14 to help do the chores and milk the cow and all sorts of things. He was a big husky boy, as you can see.
He was Anna's son?
And which would be Anna Hauptmann Haig's son. first son. Also during the summers, all of us would be out in St. Louis on the farm while our mothers worked, one in the daytime and one at night.
They lived together?
They lived together, and then during the school years, everybody would go back to Portland to go to school. Cousin Rose, Cousin Frank, and Cousin Albert. And I would go back to be with my mother, but at the time that I started to school, grade school, Mother had remarried, my dad dying in World War I of the flu at age 26. Mother had remarried the only father I ever knew, and we lived then not too far from grandmother. And
so
So
when
we-
she married down here, when she married Bill Orrin, then they lived in St. Louis?
they, Dorothy has Mother's birth certificate or marriage license. I don't know where they were married, but my mother and father, Frank Tritchler
Mm-hmm.
and Mary Hauptman, were married in St. Louis
They were?
at the church.
But they lived in Portland?
Yeah, it's
And
always
worked up
proper
there?
to be married in your
Yeah.
in the wife's hometown or whatever.
But you
I think
remember
it's
they
still
worked in Portland then? And her
Dad,
sister Ann?
yeah,
was
my
up
father, my natural father, worked in stained glass. He made church windows, decorative windows that were in these older, beautiful houses, like little fan things over the doors and lamp shades and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And
Was Anna also?
someone else was up in Portland too?
Anna, she said.
Yeah.
Anna?
And Anna had gosh, how will I make any sense out of this? Let's get back to this other picture.
Okay.
Anna married Joe Haig. This is their first child, Anna, who died of diphtheria at the age of 2 or 3. We never can find her grave. The family has looked over the years. They were too poor to buy a plot of land, so a good friend let Anna be buried on top of one of their relatives. We've been unable, that's the story, we've been unable to prove it. Anyway, to go on, Mother was married to my dad, Frank Tritchler, about the same time that Anna was 16 when she got married, and they eventually had Joe and Rose and Frank and Albert before Uncle Joe died of an accident at the killing plant for the Smith brothers in Champoeg. They had a butchering plant down there. He was gored by a bull and had blood poisoning.
So he left her a widow, huh?
Yes, with four
Poor
children.
Was she a
Mother, and then my father died of the flu in World War One, and I don't remember him at all, but Mother had discovered, and if you look at that face, you'll notice that she was pregnant with my sister Frances,
Oh.
who died when she was in her early 40s.
So she lived with Anna in a
And
house
so
in
the
Portland?
two girls lived, in those days, they lived together. In those days, there was no relief, aid to dependent children, and all this and that. If your family didn't help you, you were just,
Was the
And-
church able to help or not really
No.
financially?
they'd pray for you.
But not really. Can't
No,
put everybody into
no
homes.
food drives, no nothing.
So they worked. What
Eventually-
they do then? How did they work? Like cleaning?
did
or
housework.
cooking? Housework.
One in the day and one in the, this is after they were married.
Mhm.
One in the day and one in the night.
So someone was there to watch the
And
kids.
one was home with the children.
And then they'd
Yeah.
come down and visit their parents on
Yes.
the St. Louis.
And they
lights.
came down on the Oregon Electric. I can remember riding that Oregon Electric forever,
Huh.
forever.
That was the trolley that ran from Portland down to the valley.
It ran down the valley, and I'm not too sure how far south it went, really. I don't know how far the substations, it ran by on electricity. That's another story.
Was Genevieve still at home then with Grandma
And
Hoffman
yes,
too?
Aunt Genevieve was there, but as soon as she could, like get out of 8th grade, she went to town and lived with the girls, as she called them. And when Aunt Jen had liked to have fun. Mother said she was always running away and going to dances and this and that. And she'd wear lipstick and rouge, and they didn't like it, because they felt responsible for her. And those were two old married, two lonely, broken-hearted widows were this young, lively girl was dealing with. Anyway, Mother married William Jacob Arend, and we'll have to ask Sister Dorothy of the date.
Was he from Portland?
Mm-hmm.
Did they meet in
They
Portland?
met at a dance. He was from Cleveland, Ohio, and his father had died when he was young. His mother ruled the roost with an iron fist, and he wasn't about to put up with that. So he and a friend decided one summer that they would go west. And they worked and traveled and worked and traveled until they ended up in Long Beach, Washington, which is as far west as you can go. His friend, Harry Phelps, stayed there in Long Beach till he died. Dad went on to Portland because he was a boiler man, whatever you call it. Watched the boilers, take care of them, knew how,
That's what Grandpa did.
yeah. So, he and Mom married, and he's the only father that I ever remember, and my own father couldn't have been any better. As far as material things, we had very little, but the important things we had love, we had security, we felt wanted. We were not a stepchild in any sense of the word.
You and Francis.
Yes.
Did she marry before Francis was born, or did she marry
No,
after that?
she was little. No, Frances was born, but she was a baby.
Uh-huh. So then when they married William Warren, they lived in Long Beach? Because I remember something about Long Beach or something.
When they married, they lived in Portland, and then they moved. Then we moved out here, because Joe had gotten out of school, and Grandma was alone.
Mm-hmm.
So we were in the area, not with Grandma, but in the area, because she still had Aunt Jen, you know, and then Aunt Anna and her kids, you know. Grandma had her hands full. Always.
Now, so there was Grandma Orrin and Anna lived in Portland, and then Grandma Orrin got married and
moved out
moved
to the
down.
country.
Was Anna still in Portland?
Yes.
And Jen was still with her too?
Well, back and forth.
Okay.
Aunt Jen was back and forth.
Well, I remember something about, remember how Grandma liked those shells and things? Did she ever live at the beach then? I was thinking she lived at the beach. Grandma
Well,
Orrin
we did live there 2 years when I was in the 5th grade.
Oh.
But the shells that Grandma had, Jim brought her some
Oh.
for when he found William Jacob Orrin's and Mary Orrin's son's grave in the Philippines when he was in the maritime service.
Oh.
And they wouldn't, and they weren't allowed. We're getting off the subject here, but this is part of the family history too. Jim was in the maritime service. My son was in the maritime service for 10 years. And once when he was in the Philippines, he was able to find the cemetery where his uncle, William Jacob Orrin, was buried, but was not allowed in the cemetery because he didn't know his uncle's serial number.
Mm-hmm.
So when he came back, he talked to his grandmother, Mary Orrin. She gave him his serial number, and the next time, 2 years later, when he was back in the Philippines, he took pictures of the crosses, acres and acres and acres of them. And they still wouldn't let him even pick up a handful of dirt or a spoonful of dirt or a weed or anything. So he went to the beach and picked up all these shells. I still have them out here in the kitchen.
Oh, that's really
And give them to Mom.
Yeah.
And that's a story on my mother's only son.
Well, why did Grandma Hauptman have such a hard time then? You said Anna would come home and Genevieve would come home, but did they have a lot of health problems or something?
No, they just had a hard time getting all the work done.
Oh.
And that's why Joe stayed there to help Grandma, but also to help her with Uncle Albert.
Oh.
Because Grandma, to keep an eye on him 24 hours a day, he slept with her.
Would he black out or just
Yeah,
what?
when you have a seizure, you do black out, you pass out. He did, at least. And you just become rigid, and you might bite your tongue or something.
But
in
he
this
could go
day and
work
age,
on farms and stuff? Or he could do
Everybody
work?
knew that
Had
he
to
was
take
not
care of him.
well,
Uh-huh.
and they watch him. They never let him run any animals or any machinery or things that he could get hurt on.
So she just really had her hands full
Oh,
taking care of Albert.
24 hours a day.
I see.
24 hours. Eventually, and I don't know just when that was, Grandma moved to Portland to be with Aunt Anna, and Mother and Dad eventually moved on this little farm, in this little farmhouse. And Grandmother would go back and forth between the girls after Uncle Albert died. And he died shortly after this was taken, because I was only 2 when he died.
Hmm.
And you're the one in the...
No, I
in-
was 10. I was 2 when Grandpa died. when Grandpa died, I was 2. I was about 10 when Uncle Albert died, because we lived in Long Beach at that time.
And that's why then they came
And
down.
there, yeah, and we came home, I remember, for the funeral. So,
Let's see, I guess who
in
else?
the interim, as years passed, Mother and William Jacob Aaron had 3 children. You heard about what happened to the son,
Bill?
and Bill. And I have to tell you a story about Bill when he died, which was a comfort. He left right after Pearl Harbor, and he was not of age, but he would belong to the National Guard here in Woodburn. And he left along with a lot of other young men and spent 3 years in the South Pacific. The Christmas of the year that he was to come home, he was on a ship with a good friend of his from Salem, and they pulled into Leyte to get supplies and fuel, and they'd had an invasion of the Japanese, and the sergeant came aboard and asked for volunteers. After 3 years in the South Pacific, not a soul raised their hand. So he pointed to different people. And one of them that he pointed to was Bill Aaron. And a friend of his standing alongside of him says, "Wherever he goes, I go." So they went on patrol in the jungle. The ship did not leave. And a sniper sitting in a tree shot my brother Bill through the head and shattered his friend's right shoulder. They were walking side by side.
Mm.
Bill never knew what hit him, what happened, 1 second he's here and the next he's gone. We find all this out when this boy from Salem recuperates and comes out to St. Louis to tell Bill and Mary Aaron what had happened to their son. I just have to speak for myself. I felt really bad that Mother, and mostly Mother, I think, did not want Bill's body sent home because they said, "Do not open the casket." Her thinking was, we talked about it in later years, when my son was looking for his uncle's grave, Mother thought that it would not be his body, since you could not open the casket. But had we known at the time that he was intact, we could have had him here. But anyway, he's been moved from several different graveyards, along with many, many other World War II veterans, but now rests in the Philippine Islands, in the military cemetery there. The flag that your great-grandmother had, Emma, that was on your Uncle Billy's grave, great-uncle, is now flying in the Willamette National Cemetery in Portland. After your grandmother died, great-grandmother died, your great-grandfather gave me the flag along with other mementos of our brother. And I didn't want the flag to be
Just put in a.
I got
okay.
you.
Now, Emma, I was telling you about your great Uncle Billy's flag, and it flies on every holiday in the Willamette National Cemetery in Portland. And this is a certificate thanking me for donating the flag to them. And it's nice to have a record of this in the family history. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
We
Now,
before we go on to Grandma, your mother's other children, who are the rest of those people in that picture there? And how
Okay.
old is Rose or Mary
Okay.
Orrin there? She must be 14.
well, there's Bessie. I think Bessie would be maybe, did I write on the back? Whoop. Oh, there were none of them between Mother and Bessie because they were so close together. Okay, should we,
We can just talk about this picture.
okay. Oh, let's see. Oh, I've been trying to figure out where to start. Okay, this is Emma's great-great-grandmother,
Grandma Orrin.
isn't it?
Yes. Because I'm yes, great
Great,
grandma.
because, see, Lib would be great, and this would be great-great.
Yeah.
So
You
this
got
is
it?
Mary Orrin at her wedding or at
No.
her just a child?
Have you got it, Hunter?
Uh-huh.
Shall I stand up?
Nope,
Okay.
I've got it.
Emma, this is your great-great-grandmother, Mary Rose Hauptman. She was about 20 years old when this was taken, before she ever got married. And she and her sister Genevieve, her younger sister Genevieve, worked in a rope factory. And they made rope that was strong enough to hold ships to the docks in Portland, Oregon, in around 1913.
She was-
Now here's a picture of her, your great-great-grandmother, when she was maybe, would you say 16? She's 20 there,
Yeah.
something like that. And this is her younger sister Bessie, and they lived in Portland, not together, but they worked for different families. Mother always said Jewish. Your great-great-grandmother always said that they were rich people, Jewish people. Anyway, they were just young. If she was 14, Bessie was only about 12, 11 or 12. They were little maids in these big homes.
And their
in
mother
Portland.
and their
They
mother.
lived with the families that they worked for.
Uh-huh.
One worked on one side of the river in Portland and one on the other. And Mother said one time they were able to work for for families that were good enough to let the girls each have a day off at the same day, on the same day. Not all families were that good to them because they only worked there in the winter time. In the summer they were out helping grandmother and picking berries and that sort of thing.
They all stayed in the upstairs there at the house?
I think so.
It's just all fit in there.
Yes.
Is that Anna's baby then in
Yes.
her lap? Or is that?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the one that
That's
died.
the one that
I told
died.
you
Oh,
about.
yeah. Okay.
Anyway, these two would go to Portland on the Oregon Electric, like in the fall, and they'd never get to come home until Christmas, if they were lucky. And my mother said that she and Bessie, in the cold, cold, rainy weather, would meet halfway, which would be in the middle of one of the bridges that spanned the Willamette River at this time. And they'd each bring something to eat, and they'd dress as warm as they could, and they'd hug and kiss and cry and eat and talk about their work, you know. Then they'd both have to go back home by, well, early evening, you know, to help with dinner and clear up everything. That's all I can tell you that Mother ever told me about this picture. This is Barbara Deachin, grandmother's maiden auntie. And I'm ashamed to tell you this, but this is life. All of us kids over there, Barbara loved us all like her own. We were so mean to her. We were.
Did she live there or just?
Yeah, she
visit?
lived with Grandma. And it tells in here when she died, and I don't know how old she was, but this Barbara and this Bessie Barbara
Mhm.
are buried side by side in the St. Louis Cemetery.
I don't know that, yeah.
And Anna's last husband, his name was E.B. Moore, made headstones for the two Barbara Deachin, Barbara Hauptman, Albert Hauptman. Grandma and Grandpa have a nicer headstone.
Well then, so Grandma or Mary Orrin and William Orrin moved there. That, I
They
guess,
lived
and
out
had
there.
The 3 kids is what you were going to
Yeah, and there's where they, but you know, we were not born that, like, Emma, your great-great-grandmother was not born in that, in this house, in Grandma, great-great-great-grandma's house, but we lived around the area and they were all born in different homes. I remember Billy, the one we were talking about, you know, was born on in the old Goffin place.
Was it whoever was acting as midwife, or?
I think Dad was, my stepdad,
They
but
just
really my dad,
have them at
the
home.
only dad I knew.
Have them at home and some
Yeah.
of the women help too, or no?
Yeah, I just remember Dad being down there.
And
he
Dorothy.
made me, and Dorothy too, he attended her too. But you know, I don't really know what happened to, where Lib rather, I don't know where Lib was born. Now Emma, this would be, the Lib that I'm talking about would be your great-great-grandmother. And Dorothy is her sister and Billy is her brother. Was.
So was Grandpa Orrin really funny? Is that where this?
He had a dry sense of humor.
Where did all this pep and fire and mischievous come from? Your mother then?
Evidently.
Grandma Orrin was.
And she was more like Grandma. You know, Grandma was the
Serious.
sober, staid one. Grandpa liked to dance and have a glass of wine and enjoy life, have a good dinner. Sleep was, you know, peaceful sleep.
I just remember John talking about Bill Oren liking to play cards, and I thought he
Yes.
maybe
But did John listen to this, Emma? Did John ever tell you that Lib used to play? Lib is your great-great-grandmother, Emma. Did John ever tell you that Dad got so he wouldn't play over there anymore because Lib cheated so much?
no.
Yes, she did. He used to, she was a dyed-in-the-wool card person, a gambler. It was really the most fun, but she was, oh God, she was a lot of fun.
Well,
Elizabeth.
when you and Francis then were born, when your mom remarried Bill
Yeah.
Oren,
Mm-hmm.
and then who? Oh, Dorothy came along next.
No.
First, Elizabeth.
Grandma
was
did?
first. Elizabeth, and then Billy, and then Dorothy.
So Dorothy's the youngest one.
Dorothy's yeah. Don't you remember? She's always telling everybody she's a
She's the
baby
baby.
sister. She's got gray hair. Can't dance. Oh, I just love it.
Now, this must be one of the
This is
grandchildren?
okay.
or-
This is Marion when she was a baby.
Oh, that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
And who's?
And Emma, this is a picture of, oh Lord, how far does this go back?
Oh.
If Elizabeth's her great
Actually, Grandma
This
Lib
would
would be her great grandma.
grandma, then Mom would be your great. This is Emma. This is a picture of your great grandmother, Rose Deacon Hauptman, in Portland. And see that little braid on the top of her head? Can you see that?
It's hard to see the braid.
Oh, well anyway, Emma, she has a little braid there.
Okay, I see it.
And she wrapped it around her head, and as long as I knew my grandmother, she never cut her hair. Always had that, and it was a wispy little braid too, it wasn't very thick. Her hair was thin. I'm moving this a lot.
No, we're fine.
Did any oh, I'm sorry.
And this little girl is my oldest daughter, Emma. Her name is Marion Maxine Feller. And she was about a year or so there. And on this date, she will soon be a grandmother herself. And I will soon be a great-great-grandmother.
Did any of the relatives Germany? Do you remember?
Never could
She
find
never-
any.
So once they came here, they never got to see any
No.
more of their relatives, or
Uh-uh.
like.
That was fairly common though, huh? At that time, where once you left your home country, then you didn't go back and
Well, you probably couldn't afford to.
Right.
But
Just wondered if
grandmother,
somebody else immigrated here.
this lady never wanted to go back.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did they become friends? Did Grandma Oren know Hannah Grassman
They
back
met
east?
as neighbors.
Back east somewhere?
No,
Or,
here.
just here in St. Louis. Okay, I thought maybe they had known their families,
No.
knew each other back then.
But now would Hannah be Emma's great-great-great-grandmother
Yeah.
also?
yeah,
She would.
3
No,
greats.
great.
So just great.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay.
This is the
Hannah Grassman, what was her maiden name? Hannah.
Kappas? Was it Kappas?
Yes, Hannah Kappas Grassman was a unique lady. This is what I remember, Emma, about your great-great-grandmother. Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't anything that lady could not do, except bake bread. She could build a house. She could plumb. She could fix anything that needed to be fixed around the house. She was a great cook, except she didn't like to bake bread. She was a seamstress who did not need a pattern. She made many, I have pictures of clothes that she made for me when I was growing up. She could cut all of our hair and did.
Now, was she raised there as a? Did they
I
know each
just-
other as young girls?
You
was-
mean Mother and
yeah,
Hannah?
Yeah, I can't
I
remember if they raised.
I don't think, this is off the subject, Emma. I don't think they met until they were both married. I think
Okay.
Clarence brought her to St. Louis.
Well, I remember they talked about Grandma Hannah
Mm-hmm. Grandma
did
Hannah.
worked in the hotel in Jervis when she was about 12. She cooked there. It was a boarding house or a hotel, so
Probably along the railroad.
Yeah,
so
right
she was
there.
a young girl out, but she
Uh-huh.
worked there in that area. So
But
they didn't know
as far as I know, the folks never
each-
met each other.
Yeah. Okay.
But they had some great times over the years. My favorite story about Grandma Hannah is that as I was growing up, we used to go to different places and have dinner. Everybody, you took your kids and you went to the neighbors and had dinner if they invited you. And none of us had anything, in the way of fancy food or nothing. But Grandma Hannah could take raw carrots, this always amazed me, raw carrots and a few raisins, a little cream and sugar, and some kind of a spice. I don't remember, maybe cinnamon, I don't know. And let me tell you, sugar and cinnamon were hard to come by, and so were raisins in those days. And she could make a carrot salad that was one of the best things I've ever eaten. Where everyone else would just cook them and boil them up, Hannah had that knack about all of her cooking. Your Grandma Hannah was somebody we should have all known a lot longer. She was blessed. And she cooked for schools, she cooked for church dinners, managed them. She could make dressing that people would drive miles to come and, to come and share, because when the St. Louis church had a chicken or a dinner, everyone in the country knew Hannah was in charge, and so you couldn't keep them away. It was just great. I
And
can remember that.
and pies.
Well, I don't remember the pie so much as that, because everybody made pies,
Mm-hmm.
Malor, but Hannah always made the dressing. Just she. Time out.
Influenced your life?
Emma, we're now out in the living room. It's 4 o'clock. We're all getting tired, but I have to tell you some more stories. I want to tell you about grandmothers. My Grandma Hauptmann was very strict, very religious, very honest, not much fun, worried a lot, but one of the strongest, staunchest women that I've known in my whole life, and I'm 80 now. I thought about her so many times when I was growing up, and when I got married, even though she was a staunch Catholic, she says to me with this crooked finger, she shakes at me. I was 19 then. She said, "My child, do whatever you can. We're talking birth control, Emma. My child, she says, do anything you can to keep that seed from being planted. But once it's planted, leave it alone. So she didn't believe in abortion, but she did believe in birth control. And after 13 children and how many miscarriages, I don't know. I can well understand her thinking. After she moved to Portland to stay with her oldest child, she had to wear underwear for the first time in her life.
Because it was fashionable?
No, because Aunt Anna didn't want her to run around
Oh.
with no panties on. It's the truth. And because, you know, when they worked in the field, in the old country and here also, there were no porta potties sitting around.
Right.
If you had to use the bathroom, you just straddled the plant or your legs or something, and then you were just scalded, you know, from not being able to wipe and keep moving on. And so she did the same thing when she came here to this country. Besides, underwear cost money. But when she went to Portland to live in the city and be a city slicker, she had to wear underwear. She used to come out and stay on the farm with her daughter Mary Houtman Arend, my mother, and Mom never made her wear bras, you know, and underclothes. She could do that, but she just fussed around the house. And I know we used to wash, you know, we used to do the laundry by hand I can remember doing that for a long, long time. Well, in fact, until my brother Bill was 16, and he bought Mother electric washing machine just before he went overseas. In fact, one of the nicest things he ever did for his mother was about the last thing. And I, at that time, was working in the Ray Mailing's cannery here in Woodburn, and I remember taking one check for a week or two, I don't remember. Anyway, I made $18, and I had that old house wired, and the woodshed, and the back porch, and strung this old heavy wire out to the woodshed so Mother could plug in her washing machine and use it. We just had little bare bulbs in the middle of the ceiling, and this electrician ran bare wire, you know, big heavy black coated wires down the outside of the wall and nailed them on there with brads of some kind, and then the plug-in was up above the wainscoting.
Now you said Bill was 16, and they fibbed about their age and he went in the service when he was like 17, or?
Well, he wasn't, he was too young to go overseas. He was not too young to be in the National Guards.
Oh.
He was and the reason he joined is because he made about $22 a month or something like that.
Well, but I thought they had to be 17 or 18 to go in, you said to go in, be shipped anywhere, didn't they?
Yeah, but then he lied to get in, so into the National Guard,
Oh.
so he was able to go. And at that particular time, everybody was so full of, they were so proud to be in the service. Yeah, they were so, that's right, that they never checked him, you know, that.
Now, what did Grandpa Orrin do for work then, right there? Was he just working for farmers?
Yes,
or anything?
yes. Never did go on WPA, worked by the hour, made wood when he couldn't do anything else.
Just
Grandpa
worked.
Arn did, yeah, yeah.
Did the kids? No, I'm ahead of myself. When you were talking about your grandmother,
Yeah.
Did your mother and her sisters, did they have school for them at all? Did the girls go to
Yeah,
school?
they all, I have a picture of mother going to grade school. They all graduated evidently from, no, I take it back. Aunt Anna did not. She taught herself to read and write German when she was in Portland. And whether she went to school or whether she went to, or whether someone in the families that she worked for, because she could read and write German. And whenever she wrote English, she made these really curly Q Germanish capital letters and curled them all around, you know,
Mhm.
hard to read.
But
But mother
you
went
think
to
your
grade
mother
school.
went to school there in Jervis or in
No,
St.
they
Louis?
went to school in St. Louis.
Right in St. Louis?
Yeah. The schoolhouse is still standing. It's changed some, it's on the same location. I have a picture. It's now a home. And Emma, your, let's see, great-grandfather was on the school board.
Grandpa Orrin,
No, Grandpa Grassman,
Grandpa John, or Grandpa
Grandpa
Cliff?
John. Because he was on the school board.
Yeah, I just remember the kids, but I was just thinking, of course, the older people just went to school there then.
They went to school when ever there was nothing else to do, you know. If you could work, you still would work. But I know mother started, because I have this picture, but whether she graduated, I don't know.
Well, then they went to work at an early age.
And they worked, and I'm assuming that they just worked when they could and went to school when they could.
Yeah. I was just thinking if they'd had any chance. I didn't even know if they had a school there then.
Yes,
I thought when you guys were young, for sure there was a school there.
yes. But like I say, I have a picture of mother, Mary Hauptmann, and Lena Engelhardt, those two
That's
old
right.
buddies going to grade school together.
Yeah. So you remember then you were started school before you came to live in St. Louis then? Or
No,
did you-
we stayed with Grandma when we started to school because we lived too far out of town to walk back and forth every day.
You and who were living there? You and Francis
Yeah,
were living there.
yeah.
And then,
And then when Liv was born, you know, when she was school age, I think we lived there in Grandma's house
So you could walk to school.
and walked to school. You could walk home for lunch too if you wanted to. And,
how many?
well, anyway, back to what, hon?
I was just gonna say, how many years that? So then it went you and then Grandma lived. How many years, or actually you then
And then
Bill?
Francis went to school there, and then Lib and Bill and Dorothy. I have pictures of Bill in grade school there.
How old were you then when they started school? What grade were you in? Would you?
First grade. You know, in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then Liv's what, like 5 years or so younger than you? Or she's more than that younger than you, wasn't she?
I'm so bad with numbers, Sharon, I can't tell you.
It seems like she was 5 or 7, 8 years younger than
And,
you.
and another thing, in those days, I don't really know how old you had to be to go to school.
Were you both in school at the same time though? You were.
Lib and I,
Yeah.
we must have been, but we had 2 grades, 2 rooms and 4 grades in each
Oh,
one.
okay.
But you know, I don't remember. I remember lots of the kids going there. I remember playing baseball on the boys' team because they didn't have enough boys, you know. And I remember shaking up some of those boys because they were ornery.
Well, you went to school with Grandpa John then, right?
I don't remember him being there.
Oh, okay.
In fact, we never got in any trouble there, evidently. so.
Yeah.
Or did they go to Fairfield?
I don't know.
I don't know.
No, he
either.
went to St. Louis. Grandpa John?
I don't know.
Yeah, he did. Because he would talk about walking through the
Across the
woods.
field. Yeah.
Or through the
okay.
woods to get
Mhm.
there.
going through Joe Firstweiler's and coming out at Lawrence Firstweiler's, and you're practicing, and down the lane, you're right at school. That's probably,
I think that's what he said.
So, and then Grandma, your mother, Grandma Orrin, stayed home and just cooked, or did she work out too?
no,
when
the
kids were
folks
little?
had some, no, we all worked out. We all went out and picked berries. I can remember picking hops. And if they make the kids nowadays work like us kids did, you know, under those circumstances, you'd be tarred and feathered.
Yeah.
But we used to, I remember in the summer when, and we picked everything. We did everything. We even picked onion heads, you know.
For the seed?
When we were little, yeah, for seed. You
Now,
know.
Laura, this does have film still, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it'll stop.
Okay.
Oh, the light's on.
It'll beep, beep, beep.
Oh, and I also remember that Mother would never, no matter how hard we all worked, after we had dinner, you know, we had to do our chores, and that meant all of us taking turns carrying water in a bucket back to the barn, for there's 2 cows, and they never did quit drinking. We'd carry buckets and buckets. Mom
You
would
just
carry
had a shallow
buckets.
well there, right?
Yes, right. But in the when the good weather came, like during berry picking time, you know, strawberries and canes, but hot picking it was be cold, and but in the summertime, the first thing I'd have to do in the morning was fill up a wash tub, those metal wash tubs, with water and put it out underneath the clothesline in the back of the house. And there it would sit all day and get nice and hot. Well, when we came home, and we'd work, like go out early in the morning and come home like middle afternoon, something like that, then Mother'd make us all wash after we did our chores, wash our feet in a bucket of water. Then we could get in the soapy water and take a bath and do our hair. And then my job was throw all these dirty clothes that everybody wore in the berry yard, you know. You put them in this water, then we had some kind of a chouncer thing, and I'd have to chounce them, and then I'm supposed to rinse them. Well, forget that.
And then
I'd chounce them, hang them on the line, you know, dripping wet, because we put them on the next day, did the same thing. Good
They
grief.
dried
They
overnight?
would dry.
Huh?
They dry overnight?
Yeah, yeah. We never had jeans and things, we just had light, oh, the wind, good. We had light, you know, cottonish things that you always had to iron. Thank God Frances liked to iron, because she would always have to iron.
And then there was just the one bedroom downstairs, right?
That was Mom and Dad's.
And then everyone upstairs just
Yeah,
had
but
beds
we
like a
had the
loft.
attic too, you know.
Yeah.
So then, if you wanted a little privacy, you could go in there and sleep if you wanted. There was always a cot and a bunch of junk in there.
But, and your grandmother was
And
there with you?
grandmother's-
in a-
No, Grandma, when she came, you know, I don't remember where she slept.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, how they did that. That wasn't that big an upstairs, was it?
No, and she couldn't go upstairs either. So she
Maybe
must
they
have
put it in
been
the kitchen or
down
something.
on the Davenport, or a cot or a folding cot or something. I don't remember her ever sleeping. I remember, except when I had to sleep with her, it was so hot when I was in grade school. But I remember when we would bring the clothes in off the line, and, you know, and Frances was the ironer. And so Grandma would, when she would be out, she would fold up like a shirt or a pair of shorts that you played in. And she'd put it in a chair, and then she'd go and get a few more, and she'd put them in her lap, and she'd fold them up, and she'd put them in a chair, and then she'd sit on them. That's the only way she ironed.
Those are your
And sometimes she'd
playthings.
be sitting on the chair, you know, it'd be kind of lopsided. And we were afraid she'd fall off. She always did that, so that's what she did. And she used to, when I can remember when she came out, and we always raised beans, you know, white beans and pinto beans and all that kind of thing. And then Grandma would be sure that she'd be sure to be out there when we harvested them. And so she would help pick them, and we all would. You could. Grandma liked to come out there because she could revert back, you know, to her true self,
Uh-huh.
the peasant in her soul.
Mm-hmm.
And then she'd put all these beans, we'd put them in a wheelbarrow or something and drag them in the woodshed on some canvas or an old sheet or something. I can't remember us ever having an extra sheet. I can't remember at all actually what we put these beans on. But then we could walk on them. You know, our little feet, we could walk on them. Then you didn't have to pop them open.
Oh, is that right? That's how you get them.
That's how we
get them out
popped
of
them. Yeah,
that.
they were dry, you know.
Okay.
And the shell, you know, they would, some of them would pop over, but if you walked on them and kind of rub your feet a little bit on those beans, you know, they just pop and snap. And Grandma would sing us a song. She'd sing, this is all I remember of it. And she couldn't sing not any better than I can. And she'd sing, Bona treta bona, schwarzi wie die Weise. Let's see. Sing dee 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 da da. Meaning, in English, keep on working because if you don't,
I thought it was a happy song.
no,
sounded
what?
happy.
And bona treta me walking on the beans, the black ones and the white ones, you know. And then and I think I forget the rest because it was, so our feet would hurt, you know, and you get little cuts from those little things, you know. But I still loved her, you know.
So who would be, who was old enough then to walk on the beans?
I suppose Frances. Elizabeth was always kind of, and she'll tell you that if she was around, she'd tell you, she was never too sure-footed. You know, when she was little, she was always kind of, Grandma called her toppish, because she'd fall down so easily. You know, but as she got older, she could move pretty fast. I have a picture of her graduating from high school somewhere, or grade school, somewhere around here.
I can't imagine what she was like as a young girl. I remember the story.
Yes, I'll tell you one story. When we were, and see, in those days you could drive whenever you wanted to. There was no license and this and that, as far as I can remember. But whenever the girls, if they go to town or do something, you know, Dad would let them take the car. And Lib will tell you this, Dorothy will verify it. They'd drive, you know, miles all the way to visit this person and that person and so on. And then the dishes would still be there to do when you got home. So Lib, if it was her turn to wash, you know, she'd just swish them around a little bit, throw them in the rinse water, tell Dorothy to dry them. Well, if they had food in between the prongs, you know, Dorothy'd say no, you know. Because to get the dish towel dirty, then she'd catch it from Mom. So then eventually they'd get, and the pans were stuck in the oven and everywhere you could think of. Dad always got up first in the morning and started the fire in the wood stove. And more than once I could remember him calling up the stairs, Elizabeth!
She hadn't done the dishes.
You know. He said, you gotta come down and do the dishes. I did them last night. No, he said, you didn't. So when he'd start the fire, he'd check, everything. And there'd be crap between the prongs, He'd find all the pots and pans. He always had to check the oven because he almost burned some of them up, evidently. So then he'd make her come downstairs when the dishwater got hot. He had hot water to rinse them in, and she'd have to
Do
do
them
the
for
dishes.
real.
Yeah, nobody could help.
You've seen her children and stuff. Can you remember if her personality was like any one of the kids particularly, or if the kids were like her, so we could? Because I can imagine you were the older sister, so you had to take care of them, right?
Oh yes, and I hated it.
And Dorothy was the baby, so where did Liv fit in? Was she like Susan, or or Susan like her?
You know
or is-
what?
She's not
She
like
never
Mom.
was anything like Frances. She was, she never whined around, I don't remember whining around. But she could con you out of anything. Dorothy will tell you stories about making her go barefoot on the gravel road, and Liv would wear the shoes. They'd be Dorothy's shoes. Yeah, Dorothy could tell you. And I remember one time, this is a story that my brother Bill always told. But see, as they were getting older, I was gone.
You had been, because you
I was
were married at
married and
19.
gone.
Yeah.
And anyhow, they went across the highway. Dorothy will tell you this too. They had to go, cross over, where they got that, where they make those bathtubs and things, just past Jervis High School.
Yeah.
That road has always been there. Gravel road, for a long time. But anyhow, they get up there because they had to go across the highway. Well, there were a few cars, and Liv couldn't drive she never could drive very well. And so the kids, the kids were either hanging on the outside ready to jump off, But Bill finally told him he'd go out in the middle of the street and stop the traffic or tell Liv when it was safe to come over, drive over. Then she'd leap across the road. Dorothy said it was just right. And when Bill wasn't with him, I don't know what they did. But I remember when I was married and working in the cannery again, I always loved Bill. He was so good, He's good to everybody, especially good to Mom. Anyway, he used to drink a lot too, when when he was, 14, 15, 16, and then he left and we never saw him anymore.
They had like
home beer.
home brewed.
Or you could buy beer in the quarts. And I remember him coming down there with some of his friends, roaring down the gravel road and pulling into our little place there on the farm. And they'd sit around and talk a little bit, and smoke a few cigarettes, and then off they'd go. And one time he came down, he had a little chip out of his tooth. And I said, Bill, what happened here? Oh, he said, he was drinking when they stopped, and he cracked the bottle on the dashboard or the windshield, and it chipped his tooth. Oh, I said, you can't do that. I said, you got to have it fixed. And he said, oh no, he said, he'll be all right. I don't think it's deep enough. I said, it's right in the front of your face. You had nice teeth. I said, you have to have it fixed. So I remember making an appointment with Dr. Sanderson for him to cap that tooth, and it was in, that silverish filling that we used to, that's all we ever had. Cost $3 whole. Never will forget. So I told him the next time I saw him, I said, you have a standing appointment. You go over there and get that tooth fixed. before it aches and you have to have it pulled out. Because that's all you ever, you know, we never got to go to the dentist like we should. But we never had toothpaste either, but we had a lot of salt and baking soda.
Baking
And now
soda.
that's what they put in toothpaste, baking soda. But he had that with him when he left.
Was he like Grandpa Orand or more like Grandma Orand?
He looked more like Mom, I thought, because he had such pink cheeks. Rose used to call him, you know, Auntie Rose used to call him, what did she call him, Little Apple, or, I forgot, something about his rosy cheeks. And I remember he was little, and I had to take care of him too. And one time Mom came in from the field and sitting there in the back porch, and all warm and dusty, and so he kind of snuggled up to her, you know, and she said, "Oh, Billy," she said, "I just don't have any pepper left." And he got really serious and looked at her, and he said, "But you have a lot of salt, don't you, Mom?" I don't know why that sticks in my head. Oh, dear. Now I remember in the early spring, for years and years, all of us picked violets. We had flowers around that place, the sweetest smelling place in town. Dad kind of cultivated them along the south side of the house and along the north side, you know, where the flower beds always were, between the driveway and the sidewalk. And then in the back. And then Frances was very good at making bunches of it and putting little leaves around, she and Mom, and tying them together. And my job was to pick, and then I got to deliver them, to sell them to the florist. Olson, his name was. And on the way home, I got to stop at a bakery shop and buy day-old stuff for like a dime. We got a dime for every little bunch of violets.
Wow.
And, oh boy, we'd have coffee milk and those sweet things. Oh my, we were in heaven. We didn't even know we were poor.
Grandma Orand loved to bake that bread, sweet rolls and stuff.
But
She
in those,
always
at that
did.
time, this was a special treat.
Uh-huh. But I mean, she was a good cook.
Yes.
Wasn't she?
She could cook tasty and nutritious, you know. I remember the last thing, she always had a garden. The last garden she ever planted, Grandma Arnie, I was planting the flowers there alongside the house when she was sick enough to die, you know. And she wanted John to come over and plow up the garden, and he didn't want to, and I didn't want him to either, because it'd be just some more work to do. We didn't need a garden because she was on this strict diet, salt-free. So one day she came out of the house and she had her cane and she went in the woodshed and she got a handful of seeds and she put them in her pocket, and out she goes in this weed patch that was the garden always. And she took her cane and made a hole and dropped 3 seeds in every hole and stomped it down. She said, "My God," she said, "I'll have a garden." And you know, she died that July. And that fall, that whole area, those pumpkin seeds grew from where you're sitting, Laura, clear there. I never seen anything like it.
It was huge.
Huge, you know, big. Everybody in the country had
She just wanted
pumpkins.
she wanted to raise something.
That's right. She was a peasant at heart to the end.
Well, you said that your dad was alive when Bill got killed in the war.
Oh, yeah.
But then he died not too long after, apparently, that, huh?
Grandpa Arnie,
Oh, I remember. He died.
he died when Greg was a baby, He wasn't even born. He died, Greg was born in April, and he wasn't born yet when Dad died, because I remember Marion coming out. And Greg is 36. So, whenever that would be from 97.
30 years ago. So I was thinking she was alone, a widow herself a long time. How did she make it alive? But they had Social Security and stuff by then.
Well, Bill, like she said, I think this is one of the reasons that I get so choked up about that kid. Mother lived on his, we talked about it, she said, I've lived on Bill's blood, she said, all these years, because she got
A pension.
he left her his insurance when he was killed.
But did she also, since he was her only son, did she also get a pension for him to live on, or did she
You
just
know,
get Social
I don't,
Security
Dorothy would
on?
know more about that. I talked to Paul Graham, who was a vet and lived here in Woodburn, and he and Dorothy did what they could, and I'm not too sure just how that worked out.
I just thought of that though.
Uh-huh.
If Grandpa Orrin had died when she
Well,
was,
and then later, you know, she got some Social Security.
but there was some time in between there after
Yeah, but
Grandpa
then
died.
I think that's when Bill's checks came,
Oh,
and
that's good.
but then I gave Mom a lot of things. I bought her lots of stuff. I bought her a refrigerator and a freezer and a rug and took her to town. You know what I mean?
Well, I was just
It,
trying to think when Social Security would have actually started, if about the time she hit the right age, I guess. I remember Grandpa Grassman always laughing that he got to draw that money, sat in a
Yeah.
rocking chair, and he'd never paid into it or anything.
Well, but Dad did, because they worked in the shipyard. He worked in the shipyard.
when they had
all the
already
year.
started doing Social
Yeah.
Security then,
Grandpa Aaron.
where you had to pay into it.
Yeah.
then.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, and then everybody was good to her, you know. If anybody butchered, but you know, you still have light bill and clothes, and there's where you could help her, you know, do things for her. And my girls were good to her financially too, when they were younger. Buying her towels, I remember, because Marion especially, whenever they'd bring anything over, she'd put it away in a drawer or something, and she'd say, now, this is to go back to
They didn't
whoever.
want to use it, they wanted
Well,
to.
she used them, but she said, you know, they're to be returned, and so I told the kids too, anything you give me, you have to take back. And that way